Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a PJTN podcast where we shine the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jew and Christian, people of faith, and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza Moore. If you missed the last episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org, as well as all the other platforms that you use to access your favorite podcasts. On this week's podcast, I have invited Pastor Joe Daltorio, Senior Pastor of River of Life Community Church in Hudson, Ohio. Pastor Daltorio will discuss our biblical responsibility to engage in the culture war for our children, their future, and the future of this republic. I also want to remind you that it's important for you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues that threaten our republic and the state of Israel. So please remember to like and share. Pastor Joe Daltorio, thank you so much for joining us to discuss this important topic today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Laurie, and I'm so delighted because PJTN is doing such an amazing job of making people aware and also advocating for things that need to be done in this world today.
Thank you. And of course, the feeling is mutual because unfortunately, we don't have as many pastors out there that are willing to engage in this battle. I hear from so many people who don't hear their pastors who won't take a stand on these issues, and it's quite troubling. And so it's so important that we hear from pastors who understand biblically why we must be engaged, why we can't just go along, and to get along, that if we don't stand up, if justice and righteousness does not prevail, we are going to lose our country. And we don't know how long we have. We know that the signs are obviously there that Yeshua is going to be returning soon, but we are also called to occupy until he comes. And unfortunately, we don't have a very good history. And unfortunately, that's why we've gotten to the place that we have chosen. So Pastor Joe, it's also important to mention to this audience that Pastor Joe is hosting the Taking Back America's Children Summit that we will be holding in Hudson, Ohio, which is northeastern Ohio region. We're encouraging people from across the state to join us in Hudson on April 30th. And so we're grateful for your willingness to open up your congregation and make it available to our guests that will be coming, our speakers, so that we can discuss this topic. And so that, the goal is with this event, with the summit, is to equip parents and citizens on how to take back local control of their children's education. So Pastor Joe, let's start there, because we've got, we're looking at what's happening to our children across the country. Our children are being subjected to anti-Semitic, anti-American innuendo, pornographic content that is absolutely outrageous. We just had this horrific shooting in Nashville in a Christian school, Covenant Presbyterian, and these kids have been subjected to literature, library books, materials, videos that they have been able to access that have created this tremendous consternation in our children. And it is so important that because we're finding this problem, it's not just in Nashville, Tennessee. The problem that we're seeing is really nationwide, actually global. We've got a group down in South Africa. They're dealing with the same thing. Their education The education commissioner in South Africa is approving and allowing this pornographic material to be available to our children in the public school system. Pastor Joe, tell us about what you are seeing and what you're hearing in Ohio, in the state of Ohio, and in your community specifically.
Well, we have a battle on our hands, and we've got a lot of wonderful groups that are working to change education, and they've been advocating from the State Board of Education down through local boards of education. But first of all, let me say we've just been through one of the toughest seasons with COVID 19 over the last several years. And I know that it's easy to see the dark side of that, but I have to say that during COVID, that's when I started seeing parents begin to wake up because, and I call it the time of the great revealing. I
Mm,
think that we have seen, because of the internet education being streamed into people's homes, I
mhm,
had parents calling me saying, I can't believe what my children are hearing, what's in the curriculum. And there was this awakening, this stirring in people's hearts. They had no idea. And
mhm,
really, to be honest about American education is really focused around providing a day-long educational experience that allows people to work. And so we,
right.
for years, have trusted our government. We've trusted our local government. We've trusted our state government, even federal programs to be positive and concerned about our children. Now, what
Mhm,
we're beginning to understand is there has been a very well organized group, or actually numbers of groups, that have a very anti Christian, anti Semitic,
mhm,
anti they're anti-capitalist, and it's funny how they define Marxism and capitalism, and they put
mhm.
a good face on Marxism. And by the way, I graduated from Kent State University. I was in a political science program. Most of my professors were communist or Marxist, so
Wow.
I'm not a Bible college guy. I was part of that whole thing, and I know what Marxist does. It really destroys the soul of a nation. So we see all these things happening, and I think we're just coming awake. So I know a lot of people are discouraged right now. I actually am
Mhm.
encouraged. I study revival and spiritual awakening from 1670 all the way through the present day, and it's always darkest before God moves. And I think God is starting to move. And when I say
Mm,
awakening, I don't just mean a feel good experience where we discover God's warm love, but the transformation of society where we see such a move of God that it changes the very way that our government, our education system, pop culture, all of that
mhm.
has changed. And I think we're going to see one more wave of that, at least before the return of Messiah. I am praying for that to happen.
Amen. Yeah, well, we have been watching what's been happening across this country. And of course, my mind goes to Governor DeSantis, who really was at the forefront of this whole education movement. If we think back over the last decade, because, a decade ago, we had found a textbook in Williamson County, Tennessee, which is the belt buckle of the Bible Belt, and the textbook had a quote, an anti Semitic quote, legitimizing Palestinians blowing themselves up in a Jerusalem restaurant because they were waging a war against Israeli government policies and army actions. And upon reviewing that book, because it was a parent who brought it to my attention, it was her son who had been homeschooled along with my children at the same time in Williamson County. And this was her son's first year in high school. They decided as a family that they had grounded him solidly in the word. They had taught him, the basic concepts of, reading, writing, critical thinking, and they felt that their son was ready to go into the world. Well, it took only 2 months that her son was in the public school system. He came home from school and he said to his mother, he asked his mother, who has legitimate rights to the land of Israel? Well, of course, coming from an evangelical Christian family who homeschooled their child, she said, what does the Bible say? And he said, I know what the Bible says, Mom, but tell me the truth. Who has legitimate rights to the land? And that's when it was like, somebody had just kicked the wind out of her sails. And she started questioning him about what, where this was coming from. And apparently there was a speaker in school that day who had come to talk about the whole Arab-Israeli conflict. And come to find out in the book that he was reading, that chapter for that day dealt with the issue, and that's where they found the quote. So she contacted me and she said, "You'll never believe what we're teaching our children in Williamson County schools." So she brought me the book. She let me keep it for a couple days. I reviewed it from cover to cover. Not only did we find the anti Semitic quote that her son had referenced, but also the anti American, anti Judeo Christian, anti the values that our children should have been taught but weren't taught, anti the Judeo Christian values our nation was founded upon. And that was what was shocking. And we launched the campaign back in 2012 to expose what was happening. And it was amazing the resistance that we got from the school board, the local school board. You would have thought, because, again, an evangelical Christian community, conservative, Republican, we had it all. And here we were getting resistance where the school board members were not in agreement, and they voted to keep that textbook in the classroom. And so that's when we, went to work. I was able to take those books that we had found in Tennessee. I compared them. I cross compared them to what was being taught in Florida. And fortunately, one of my donors to Congressman at that time, Congressman DeSantis, arranged for me to meet with him. I brought him the books and showed him what we were finding. And that's when he said he made a commitment back then. He said, "I'm running for governor. And if I get elected, we're getting rid of these textbooks. We're getting rid of Common Core." And sure enough, he got elected, and that was his first order of business. And of course, PJTN's been involved with his Department of Education in reviewing civic standards, in reviewing the textbooks, civics and social studies textbooks, as well as history textbooks in the state of Florida. And he really has taken on the issue. And he's led the charge, and it's led to all these other states now where the state legislators are stepping up and saying, "We're getting involved," or our congressmen, or I know that there was talk about banning, or not banning, but removing the federal Department of Education from our states. And so Ohio, of course, being one of the states where there's a lot of active members, as you said, there's a lot of great organizations that are fighting this battle on the front lines to try to remove this garbage from our children's schools, to save our country, to save our republic. So let's talk about our biblical duty, because we have a biblical history in the United States of America. In fact, our government, our republic, was founded on the principles that are established in the Torah of Moses. And so, unfortunately, Pastor Joe, we are not teaching those truths, that history, to our congregations anymore. It's almost as if we've forgotten that biblical history, the Pilgrims, the Puritans, who they were, and the values that they held to. So, Pastor Joe, what are your thoughts about the founding of our country, about the principles that our nation, the Judeo-Christian principles our nation was founded upon? How important is this to us as Christians to communicate and teach to our congregations, future generations of Americans?
Well, we definitely have a strong Christian past, and that is, and to be honest with you, not everybody, not all of our founders were Christians, but the strong influence of Christianity and even Reformed Christianity in shaping our Constitution, the Bill of Rights. I mean, it's uncontested. So
Mhm.
before I was a pastor, I was a teacher. And I was a licensed teacher here in the state of Ohio. And I have to tell you that part of the problem is many of our educational institutions have been captured generations ago. You can go back to 20th century with Johnny Dewey at there in New York City, forming
Mhm.
education and all of that. But really, it even goes back before that to the 19th century, and this is where our battle begins. Our state colleges that were formed in the 1870s, and even many of the older institutions that were almost all of them were founded by the church
Mhm.
or by a religious organization.
Mhm.
And they have fallen away from their original understanding. And a people that forget their history will lose their way. I think
Mhm.
it's really clear. You see it in the Jewish scriptures where God tells his people 3 times a year, I want you to go to Jerusalem. I want you to recount with your children the things that were done in your day and pass these on to the next generation. Of course, a good Jewish family understands, what the law says and the
Mhm.
writings about informing your children and having
Mhm.
them write it on their houses and understand what God has done in past generations. The
Mhm.
same thing is true for us. We need to pass on to the next generation. So when I teach my church, I always weave history in, and people tell
Mhm.
me they love it. History has to be part of what we're doing. I'm doing a history now of spiritual awakening and revival.
Mhm.
And I mean, in our town, John Brown stood up in 1836 in Hudson, Ohio, and declared war on slavery. We were site zero for the abolition movement here. And then
Wow.
Charles Finney came down out of New York at Oberlin College, and Harriet Beecher Stowe came up from Cincinnati with her husband, and we're right there down the street at Oberlin College. So all this was happening, and people don't know that these were the things. And I said, you need to understand, it was the evangelical Christians in the early 19th century, the early 1800s, that fought the war and ended slavery. And
Mhm.
I believe that God has a task for us today to fight this evil of deception and the seduction of our children in the same way that he did it back then. The
Mhm.
people back then, were overwhelmed. They felt like they had no choice against some of the powers that were out there. But with God, we can do all things. So
Amen.
I would tell parents, you need to start here by recounting the history not
Mhm.
only of the Word of God, but also the history of what God has done in past generations. I'm taking my granddaughter this afternoon to see Jesus Revolution, and I already told her. I said, I
Mhm.
want you to know what happened to me. I was part of that Jesus Revolution, and
Mhm.
now I want you to see this. And I'm going to ask her at the end. We're going out for dinner, and I'm going to say,
Mhm.
honey, what is God saying to you about your generation?
Mm.
What does the Lord want to do in your? It's not going to look the same. But God
Right.
gave me courage
Mm.
back then. I was playing the Doobie Brothers song to her saying, I don't care what men may say. I don't care what men may do. Jesus is just all right with me. That was
Yeah,
a powerful statement to that generation. So I
that's
said,
right.
do you fear what man thinks about you? Do you fear what people think about your Christian faith?
Mhm.
She said, no. And I said, well, what are you going to see God do in you, in your generation? So this needs
Mhm.
to be part of what we're doing with our children. We need
Amen.
we need to be involved. And we have people that their kids are in public school, Christian school. And by the way, there's a lot of anti-Semitic stuff in Christian schools that I found. I'm sure that
Mm.
you've discovered that.
Yes,
One of our
unfortunately.
I sent one
Mm.
of our young men to a conference in Atlanta, and he came back totally anti-Israel. And I said,
Mhm.
"What happened?" And the Willow Creek people, I'll name them. They were there, and they were talking about the Palestinians as being an oppressed minority, and they took the
Mhm.
Marxist view. And I thought, how did this get into the church?
Yeah.
So we need to really be careful in sharing our history with our children.
Yes, absolutely. Well-intentioned people. I remember years ago when it was uh, the Green family with the Hobby Lobby chain that had been involved in producing a documentary that was counter to the biblical narrative of God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants and the covenant of the land. And that was a shocker to me because, I had grown up and raised my kids during that era where, you know, um, where evangelical Christians were standing out, coming out prominently in support of Israel. So it was a shocker to me to see um, that uh, that the that the Green family had been involved in a pro-Palestinian documentary film countering the narrative. So it's unfortunate because unless you study the foundation, unless we study the covenant God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And it's right there in the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, the Septuagint, we as Christians know it as. But unless we study that history and we see the covenants, we see the promises that are eternal, they don't end. And unfortunately, as Christians, we're not taught that history. We're not taught, we're barely teaching our kids about the history of America. And I love what you're doing, especially with bringing the story of the revivals that came through Ohio. And to me, it tells me, and all Ohioans should know, they have an important spiritual destiny, that a seed was planted that needs to continue to be fertilized and developed for future generations. There's a reason why Ohio is such a strategic state politically, but also spiritually as well. So that's very exciting to hear. But no, we as Christians can't. We have to know the covenant, because God told Abraham, "I will be your God." The covenant, the promise, was threefold. I will be your God to you and your descendants after you. I will make you like the stars of the heavens and the sands on the seashore, and all the land you see. I'm giving it to you and your descendants forever. We are commanded in Judges to teach these truths to our children and our children's children throughout our generations. So that means parents, grandparents, great grandparents, they need to be teaching these things to the children, because they have a story that our children are not hearing, a narrative that our children are not reading in the books that our children now have access to in the public school. But I'm very excited about what's happening in Hudson, what we're going to be involved in here in April 30th. So it's coming up. So we want to encourage our listeners. If you want to join us in Hudson, Ohio, now's the time. I think we have 300 seats. Is that correct? Or we have more?
Just about 300, right?
Okay, so we're going to have limited seating. I know that registrations are already coming in. People are already registering. People are very excited. I'm really excited about the organizations that we are collaborating with that are also excited about coming together. And one of the things that I find Ohio is so good at is collaboration. And unfortunately, in a lot of communities, it's very difficult to get organizations to work and collaborate together. But I am amazed at how the people in the community in Ohio are, all the organizations that are involved in fighting for our freedoms, fighting for our states' rights, fighting for our families, our children. I am just amazed at the collaborative effort of these organizations. So, Pastor Joe, as we are wrapping up this interview, I would love to ask you what would you say to our audience? Maybe someone out there is, considering attending this event, but they're not real sure. How important is it for us, for Christians, Jews, and all people of conscience to get involved in taking back local control of our children's education, of our communities? How important is it?
It is so important, and I always go back to Matthew 18, where Jesus is holding and blessing the children, and he gives a warning there. He says, if anyone causes one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better for them to have a millstone around their neck, and they would be tossed into the depths of the sea. We
Mm,
need to understand the heart of God for children is so amazing. We will answer to God, and I feel this so strongly, for how we have advocated for and protected our children. There is
mhm,
no excuse whether your children go to public school, Christian school, even homeschooling. We need to be
mhm,
involved in what they are learning, dialoguing with them. We need to be involved in our schools. And frankly, the people that have taken over our schools, they have a plan. I heard a quote many years ago: people without a plan are always at the mercy of those who have one. There are
mm,
people in your community that have a plan, and their plan is to defile children, and they will do it thinking they are doing the best thing. Some of the ungodly things that we are seeing in the public schools, whether it's pornography or an anti-Christian bent in the curriculum, whatever. We need to be speaking out. We need to be advocating. And honestly, in many school systems,
Hmm.
just showing up and showing concern and bringing awareness can bring change. So we have seen some of that. Now, there are others that there's a more entrenched battle. And that's where we need to be involved with other parents.
Hmm.
And they want to portray parents as these rabid, well, you know, there was,
Terrorists, domestic terrorists.
yeah, the Justice Department investigation of parents, exactly. But that's not who we are. We're people that love
Hmm.
children. And we want to be supportive of teachers. We want to be
Hmm.
supportive of the curriculum. I will say this, the teachers' unions are the enemy of parents and children right
Absolutely.
now. And I ran into that years ago. I was asked to join the NEA as a teacher, and I had to take a stand. And boy, I had a rough year because I said no. It was quite an experience. So you pay
Hmm.
a price when you do this, but I don't think there's any other choice for us. I don't
Yeah.
want to stand before God someday and say I didn't speak out about the books in my kids' library. I didn't get
Right.
involved in their education. And when we act surprised when our children lose a grip on their faith, when we weren't involved in their lives,
Hmm.
there's a disconnect there.
Yeah.
That's unacceptable. We
Hmm.
can't be lazy. If we are the kind of Christians that just show up at church for an hour and we don't live our faith on a daily basis, I think we're going to bring judgment on ourselves. And I know that sounds heavy, but it's true.
No, absolutely. We have a responsibility to uphold, to bring light into the dark world. And our children are suffering because we haven't been engaged, we haven't been involved, we trusted the system, like what you said earlier. We believed that our kids, that the teachers, the educators, the administrators who oversaw our children's education, that they had the best intentions for these children, that they had the best intentions toward America and our constitution, our freedoms. But unfortunately, as you said, it's the NEAs, it's the teachers' unions that are pushing this agenda. And unfortunately, our teachers have found themselves squarely planted in the middle. They can't speak out because they can't lose their job, because they need that job to pay their bills. Do they want to teach this garbage that they're being forced to? I've had many teachers contact me, some anonymously, encouraging me and telling me, don't stop, you need to look at this county and what they're the books that they're using, the library books that they're giving our children access to, that books are not being properly reviewed and vetted when they're being dropped off, because a lot of these books, especially the library books, are, even though they have published names, like, recognizable names like Penguin House, Random House, all of the publishers that we grew up on, that were respected publishing houses, they've all been bought up by organizations like Bertelsmann, a publishing house that is in Europe, is in Germany. It's a German publishing house. This is the same publishing house that is buying up all of these different publishers, that was producing the Nazi youth Christmas books. So this publishing house has a long history of being involved in ungodly publications. So they're the ones that are buying up these books. And of course, when a librarian gets a stack of those books dropped off at her desk, and she sees it's Scholastic and she sees it's Random House and Penguin books, she says, oh, these are reputable books. Do they bother checking them to see the content? No, they just put them on the shelf. And they put them in elementary school areas and middle school areas and high schools. Pastor Joe, from what I've seen, and you probably can attest to this, not one of those books are fit for any age group, K through 12. There is no redeeming value that is being taught to our children through this propaganda.
No, we had an interesting situation here in Hudson with a young lady who was really defiled by what she was reading, and the family went to the school board, and there were meetings, and of course parents showed up. But they excused it by saying this was a college prep course and she's going to face this in college. I wouldn't even want that stuff to be presented in college.
Yeah,
I mean, it's obviously that you're going to face those things,
yeah,
but it's ridiculous. And
yeah.
if I could just something off you said a moment ago, I would encourage teachers and administrators to come to this event as well. on April 30th. There are lots of people that don't know what to do, and you're right, they feel like they're caught in the middle of all this. There are
Hmm.
good teachers out there, and we need to help equip them. And I think I saw you have a couple different representatives from teachers organizations coming. So
Yes.
I would say,
Hmm.
please come. It doesn't have to just be parents. If you're involved in education,
Hmm.
grandparents, everybody can be involved in this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Pastor Joe, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, again, Pastor Joe Daltorio, he is going to be hosting our Taking Back America's Children Summit on April 30th in Hudson, Ohio. Please go to our website at pjtn.org to get more information. Please sign up. Share the information with your family and friends. We have to take back local control of our communities. We cannot trust the federal government, even our state government. We're working on overhauling our state government too, but we have to start by taking back control of what our children are being subjected to, introduced to, and we can't do it without you. So our goal is to do like what we did in Williamson County when we could not get rid of that anti-Semitic textbook. We put every one of the school board members on notice because it was an election year, and we told them, if you don't get rid of this textbook, we're getting rid of you. We're coming after your seats. And they voted that night to keep that book, and we had 4 months in order to flip the school board. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? We did it. We had 4 months to find people to run, and then those people ran. They had support, they had volunteers, they had intercessors who were praying for them. And in come August, on election day, all 6 school board members that were up for re-election were all brought down in one election because the people of the community stood up and said, enough is enough, not on my watch. We can do this in Ohio. There are, I think it's 167 school districts across the state. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we need people from across the state, across the country. If you don't live in Ohio, you can still come to this summit if you're hearing this message, because this is about giving you the tools to flip your school boards, to take back local control of your community. And it's, I have to thank Pastor Daltorio for making this happen. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found this program informative. We will post this podcast on our website and all of our podcast platforms so that you can share it with your family and friends. Additionally, if you would like to get a copy of the white paper PJTN has published for Governor DeSantis, please visit our website at pjtn.org. Go to the Get Involved tab at the top of the page, click on it, and scroll down to the bottom of the page and look for white paper. Please share this information with family and friends. Remember, even though this white paper exposes anti-Semitic content in Florida textbooks, these textbooks are being used across the United States. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to stand against the ungodly rising Marxist threat that is destroying this nation and other Western nations, threatening our Judeo-Christian values and promoting anti-Semitism. We cannot remain silent, as you heard Pastor Joe say. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman. And if the watchman sees the enemy advancing and doesn't warn the inhabitants of the city, and any innocent blood is shed, God's going to require it of that watchman. But if the watchman sees the enemy, warns the inhabitants, then if any innocent blood is shed, it will not be required of him. You stand as a watchman, ladies and gentlemen, to sound the alarm, to warn others simply by sharing this podcast with your family and friends. So please share and like this podcast. Help sound the alarm in your community. And I just want to remind you, Dietrich Bonhoeffer said to us, he still speaks to us, even his voice from the grave, when he said, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. Don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about combating the rise of anti-Semitism and taking back local control of our communities and our children's education. In fact, we're going to have Jim Renacci on, the former gubernatorial candidate for Ohio. So I also want to remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, you can help support this mission through our award-winning documentaries and Focus on Israel programs, as well as more programs like this for just $20 a month. So go to our website at pjtn.org to watch our programs and listen to our past podcasts. With your generous monthly donation, you can ensure that PJTN remains on the front lines and in the headlines, but we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the state of Israel, and of course, these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.